Welcome, everyone. This is the Psychedelic Sisterhood panel for the legalization of adult use cannabis, and we're discussing the MRTA bill today, or the MRTA bill. I'm your host, Pammy, of the Psychedelic Sisterhood. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to open about talking about what was legalized since 2021. This year alone started with varying degrees of legalization for unrestricted THC content cannabis in 34 states, and continued federal prohibition except for low THC hemp. Several states considered candidates for 2021 legislation to legalize cannabis for adult use, including Connecticut, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, and Virginia, some of which already, like New York, were decriminalized. And at the federal level, the Democratic Party's majority in both houses of the 117th United States Congress was cited by the Politico as a likely precondition for federal legislation in 2021, with a Safe Banking Act likely to pass. So we are joined by our panelists this evening, Victoria Litman of representing Decriminalize Nature NYC, and Aaron. Ooh, Pilar just joined us.
Genuth.
Thank you. And Aaron Genuth of Hudson Valley Psychedelic Society. I had to think about it. And Decriminalize Nature New York State. And also Pilar Dejesus of TakerootJustice. Welcome, everybody. Will each of you on the panel please describe how your organizations contributed to decriminalization of the psychedelics in New York? Whoever wants to start.
I guess I can start. Yeah, I'm Victoria Litman, and I would say Decriminalize Nature New York City, who, Pilar, do you want to go? Raise your hand. I see her.
Sorry, yes, I'm here trying to unmute, but I also want to give people a chance since they, I just entered the room, and I just want to really apologize for just getting here. I was a little behind, as some of you know, it's my birthday this week, so just got to Puerto Rico, to my country, so celebrate. So I apologize for my tardiness. But how we got into this business really quickly, not to take too much room, is that, we've been advocating, in Albany for the last few years now, working with the legislators to get this bill that just passed with legalization. It's not a perfect bill, but we've been involved really heavily, in this process, but also in different other areas, when it comes to housing, when it comes to immigration, because, all of it is intersected. But for the most part, in this, this part of this very, exciting week that we had, because just a week ago was when we signed the bill, was part of the work of the Start Smart Coalition and many organizations like the one that I work for, and others, and just a bunch of great people. So yeah. But I hope that answers the question. And I'm gonna get on video right now, if I can just find the light in the Airbnb that I'm at. Sorry.
Happy birthday. Thank you for spending some of your time with us, Pilar. It's so amazing. And yeah, Decriminalize Nature NYC, which Pilar and Aaron are both also a part of, was not necessarily advocating for the MRTA in the same way that Pilar's organization has for such a long time. They're more forward thinking about, it was definitely consideration in the language around like cannabis and psychedelics and making them the lowest level law enforcement. But the MRTA is a statewide bill, and Aaron will talk about some statewide efforts perhaps, but the efforts that I've most focused on have been local. I am excited to be here to talk about the MRTA. I can take.
Try it. Second.
Noah, you're unmuted. It would be great if you muted yourself. There we go. Um, and yeah, I'm happy to be here to talk about the MRTA. I am almost going to be a lawyer soon, so I've been stuck in law school and taking the bar exam these past year, 2 years, 3 years. So I've not had my feet on the ground like Pilar and Aaron. So I'm honored to be here to speak with them.
Yes, I'm very honored to be here with both of you, with the chance that I've had to get familiar with your work and expertise. And thank you so much, Pammy, for having me and for hosting this discussion. And I agree with you, Ethan, what you said in the comments, that it's been a really long time coming. And even a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing this discussion, it was about CERTA versus MRTA, and it's so much better to be having this discussion. So to speak to the question, Hudson Valley Psychedelic Society, of course, is psychedelically focused. There hasn't been much direct action around the around cannabis legislation. From Decrimination New York, the we had it's a recently launched platform to be more of a policy platform and an organizing base on a state level for decriminalization and decrimination legislation. But we had meetings aligning on the need for supporting MRTA versus CERTA on the fundamental point that aligns with decrimination of home grow, which, as we'll definitely get a lot into the history, CERTA, the other bill up, disallowed home grow, and in the more recent version, even disallowed home grow for medical patients, which was allowed in previous ones. So that was a major concern. And based on my long history advocating for change from a grassroots level in cannabis and drugs in New York, I was not optimistic about MRTA passing versus CERTA, and thought that's what we'd be combating. So I would say, to get back to the question, because I don't want to go on one of the many tangents that I could on the overall topic, is that the focus where I've been working from, and where I think Decriminalize Nature, where I aligned with Decrimination, and where Decrimination has been working from. In 2019, I co-founded Decrimination New York City and was working with groups including cannabis activists to do what was successfully done over the course of several years, which was to block CERTA, Governor Cuomo's legislation, do whatever it is to keep that from passing, with the recognition that that would be worse, that we will get better legislation, and that what he was proposing would be worse than continuing to fight and fighting for decriminalization, and doing this, which was a really difficult struggle. And I'll say that it's Pilar and so many people in the grassroots that were really connected to fighting for this from within and without for so long, that that really made this victory happen. This relative victory, I'll say.
Thank you so much for those introductions. You guys have been doing incredible work, and I thank you for being here, honestly. Let's get started. Let's see. Let's start by covering the laws of marijuana, the possession of it, and the use in New York. Would anyone like to start off with that, as far as criminal penalties? Has anything changed as far as like criminal penalties are concerned?
I don't mind just like really celebrating. I found the light, guys.
Yeah.
I think really one thing, not to go again and cut anyone, but really think we should really celebrate, like for me at least, like what's really, really on top of all other things, and it's not perfect, but what's really, 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 really fucking feels good, and what I've been hearing a lot from my people, is that police cannot use the excuse of you smelling like weed to mess with you and stop and frisk you. So there's a lot of amazing things here, but I just want to say, for me, that just feels really good. And like, yeah, I have that, yeah. So that's something that's changed.
I think there's something to be said about that. I'm so sorry, Erin. You're about to say
Oh,
something?
no,
Mm.
please, I didn't want to cut you off because I think Victoria, I know Victoria's got the most direct experience on this. So just to kind of add to, I did really want to defer to what she's been researching about directly answering, but to add to also Pilar's point, I saw one of the things that's allowed because of the smoking laws that exist in New York is that and anybody can correct me if I'm off at all, is that one of the only places that you can now legally smoke cannabis in New York City is on the streets, is directly on the sidewalk. And the police, there was headlines in the New York Post really complaining about that. Now people will be able to smoke on the street. And that really felt good to me because I've been able to smoke on the street for well over a decade. They're not stopping. They haven't been stopping white Jewish people from, living in South Brooklyn from doing that for a long time. What they're saying is now we can't stop young Black and brown men and people from smoking on the street. And so that was a really validating and moment that felt like a real victory for the city and for a lot of the people that have been hit well after the city acknowledged that this should be decriminalized and said that it was decriminalized and acknowledged that stop and frisk was a terrible and racist policy. So that felt really good, but I really want to defer to Victoria on her experience with answering this.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add, it is a lot to celebrate. And I think I'm not a New Yorker. I won't claim to be a New Yorker. I lived here for 5 years. It's been a great place for me to live. I've been a patient here. I'm educated at schools here. Like, I love New York, but I see this like playing out a lot across the country. And so I guess I'm more skeptical because like in legalization in California did not mean like a decrease in criminalization. It just meant a different kind of criminalization. And so when I read these laws, I'm reading them with like sort of this like hesitancy to be so excited, but I also have not put in the heart and the time. And so like I'm treading carefully because it's different for me. But when I read the NYPD memo that they did release, although it does say in the top line items, you can possess up to 3 ounces, and there is some confusion about what goes into effect when. And Aaron and we can talk more about this, like the pounds that you can have at home and how many people, and because there are still criminal penalties for possessing above a certain amount, like felonies and misdemeanors outside the licensed market. But one thing that I think is important is Pilar is 100% right that the smell of marijuana alone can no longer establish probable cause, but it does say that evidence of smoking, so like a joint or a bowl, like a butt, or maybe even like rolling papers. I mean, I don't know, that can be used to justify a search of the passenger compartment, but not the trunk. You need separate probable cause. But and then one other thing is you actually can't. This is what it says, anyways. It says that you can't smoke or vape while you're in the vehicle at all. So not just as a driver. So I don't know about anyone else, but I've been in the back seat smoking. Of course, what Aaron said is true. Like, I'm not the kind of person that's getting criminalized in this way anyways, as a white person. But just knowing that they can still like give you a citation. It says they can actually give you a criminal court summons for a minor charge of smoking in a prohibited location. So your car is not a safe place. So I think it's important that we don't just, like, because I still don't trust the cops. I still think they're going to try and come up with whatever reason they can to criminalize certain people. So really understanding what your rights are. But I love that you can smoke on the streets. I think it's beautiful.
So you brought up a great point, Victoria, about having a certain amount in your car, like or a bowl filled, or just rolling papers, to find anything to throw a citation. But does that also will that also cover, like, oh, I lost my question. I'm sorry.
Pilar, did you have something you wanted to add after me? I saw you.
Yeah, intent to sell. That was what I was thinking. So if you're having like a certain amount on you, like, is that also intent to sell? Like, like do the laws like protect people against selling or for selling? Or
You cannot sell at all. You can gift up to, and Pilar, anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was going through this last night. You can possess up to 3. You can give lawful amounts to people who are over 21, but no compensation. Compensation meaning like any kind of sale from any person. The only way that you can like buy it will be in a dispensary. You can't actually buy it from a co-op or any other way. And in terms of like possession and intent to sell, I think it gets kind of messy. And those are questions I have around, like, Aaron, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
To just add to your point, and I hope this is relevant to the answer, those elements like what Victoria's described, I think are very big for building community models for cultivation and really, I mean, this is from the Decrim Nature model of grow, gift, gather, but that that there's a real possibility with what's allowed in cultivation and in sharing of building a nonprofit model, building models, and I think we can maybe dig as co-ops, as Ethan says, absolutely, and on models that existed in many cases in California prior to legalization and in less regulated times. And I have a lot to say on this topic and the compassionate care models, and I've done journalism and all sorts around this, and it was a lot of what inspired me coming back to New York after spending some time in California, cannabis and psychedelics and too much of the corporate element, that there's an opportunity to hopefully build things differently from the ground up. And that to me is one of the biggest victories here, is there are so many things worked into this legalization that allow for that. And I think that this is one of those, and I don't know if, and I see that Victoria is not entirely in agreement. I would love to hear that, because there's a lot of perspectives on this. And where I'm coming from is from a very specific model that doesn't want to rely on a commodification model and the dispensary model for many reasons, but including that is the barriers to entry to that are going to be a lot more difficult for people growing on a community and a home level to then build community, to build cultivation, experience and education, and then economic power around that.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, a lot of what was just said, and I think, like was mentioned, you cannot sell. You're gonna need a license, and something to really like point out also. Yes, and co-ops is a beautiful thing. There is some co-op language in the MRTA. It's not exactly what we put in there, but it is close. But again, it was something that we got in negotiations, but. Social equity, 50% of the applications are going to be for folks who have, what they consider the legacy markets, or people who have been, directly affected, because we also recognize, especially looking at the other states, to the people who have been the most harmed are not getting the reparations. And so that was part of the framework of this bill, is reparations on top of the community reinvestment, expungements. But like, to answer your question about licenses, yeah, you can get one, but that process and how that's going to look is going to be established by the Cannabis Review Board. There's still the regulatory part to come up. So we got the framework of the house, but we still got to put all the insulation and all the other things that goes into the plumbing, the heat that goes into building a house. That's my analogy.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Pilar just said, and we'll just note that every element that Pilar just mentioned are progress over what happened in California with their legalization. And there's a lot, and the analogy is perfect. There's a lot of possibility of that, the intent behind everything that Pilar just mentioned being diverted, and there are agendas and groups working against it. And I know Victoria's knowledgeable on that point as well. But those are all areas that a lot of work went in to make this a significantly better bill than in what's passed in a lot of the country. And that gives us a lot of possibility, as Pilar said, to build from this. But we've got to do that, because I don't think we can trust the state and big cannabis too. I know that very, very much. I shouldn't say I think.
Let's keep it rolling with the possession. As far as the medical marijuana license, who can apply for that? Because I think it was pretty regulated here in New York when it wasn't legal. So what has changed with that?
In terms of what's changed in terms of licensing, those licenses were completely vertically integrated. So meaning like you had to have like and they're the only ones that will remain completely vertically integrated, meaning like from seed to sale, they're doing the whole thing. They're cultivating, processing, and dispensing their own. I'm trying to think what's the most relevant thing. I guess in theory, all these licenses are open to like anyone who has, it says like, this is actually a question I had. It says like who has a significant relationship to New York, meaning like a citizen here or like incorporated here, which kind of feels like it has the potential for some out-of-state company to come form a corporation in New York and apply for a license, because if they're incorporated here, but I think the big thing to talk about in terms of licensing, and I spent a summer in Denver, met a law firm, and these law firms, how they make most of their money, is helping people with these licenses. And so when I read this bill that's 120 some pages, and all of these sections, when you look at the licensing around, like, you need to show that you have like proof of a premises with which you could, if you got a license, be able to actually like have a physical space. So that requires like know-how and money and a lawyer probably. And like, it feels like there's so much that they put into these licensing applications that will require a lot. I think one of them said that you can either have like proof of a premises, or you can have a $3 million bond. And I'm like, who has $3 million just like sitting around that they're going to be able to like bond? Like, so you're gonna have to show capital, and you're gonna have to show a team probably. And the way the regs usually do is they kind of follow the statute. So if you look at the statute under the licensing, it'll say like what's considered, and then the regulations will kind of break down from that and have like smaller pieces. I think because I worked in licensing, I am more jaded, that I think it's a really unfair process, like just innately. I think I love that the fact that the 50% towards social equity is in there is better than it not being in there. But it's still like, you know, California had some of that stuff in there. They also have local licensing, so we're not going to have that, which is a good thing, because more licensing, more fees, more lawyers, more BS. But like, they also had tax reinvestment that wasn't reinvested. So I think like this is maybe jumping ahead, but in terms of licensing or anything, like that's where we have to hold people accountable. Like that's where the fact that it's in there. Noah, I love Noah's question, which is legalize the legacy market. Well, that was the other thing I was going to say. Like, I don't actually think the 50% social equity, the micro licenses are in there. I've heard that there might be a cap on that, but those will also have the same licensing process. There's an advisory board, which will set the licensing fees. The advisory board is uncompensated, which I have a problem with, but I could see arguments for why they shouldn't be compensated. But I think if we're going to expect people to give time towards something, they should be compensated for that time. But in terms of like legalizing legacy market, I actually don't like, people need amnesty, right? Like, in order to be able to come forward, you can't apply for a license right now under this framework, and as I read it, and they could change it in the regs and we could push for it, but you can't apply for a license and say, I should get a license because I've been operating illegally for the last 20 years and I have the know-how and I have the skills and I have the distribution network. Like, that's not the kind of data they want. They want you to show that you have capital. They want you to have people on your team that like have other related pharmaceutical or drug development or sales experience, that maybe have it in other states or stuff like that. But I think I think amnesty and legacy licenses would be amazing. I've heard other perspectives that, what do you do if you do that? Because if someone like identifies themselves and then they don't get issued a license, what happens then? So I just spoke on a lot of topics because the chat blew up, but I want to hear what Aaron and Pilar have to say, and I can talk more about licensing after too.
So I certainly have some thoughts about it. It doesn't really appreciate. I really appreciate all of that, Victoria. And I think this speaks to where I'm working from and a bit of what the decrim nature model is, which is grassroots. It's working on solidifying the alternatives to what you're describing and getting around a lot of how the licensing is going to work, which is that fundamental thing that they've all had, which is you've got to show capital, the barrier to entry. It sort of doesn't matter how legal it is if you can't afford that 3 million or whatever it is that you can show that you have the infrastructure to do this stuff. So I think that's where maintaining and fighting for compassionate care, for a nonprofit element to the industry, for things like co-ops and clubs, for elements like religious and community organizations to be able to be involved. I think that's going to be really important. And I think a lot of the inroads that we have in this legislation is through medical. The medical allowances are going to expand by a lot, and medical cultivation kicks in 6 months versus recreational, which kicks in 18 months. And I am pretty sure that that's going to be everybody grandfathered in with a medical card. I hope so, because I just got one today, and I'm really exploring that, and hopefully going to build models for that on how how we can build around the 6 plants per person model. I've connected to people in the past in California, and a lot of this been preparing for years, connected to people in California where in a lot of areas they had limits based on amounts of plants, and in a lot of areas that was 6 plants. And I know somebody who's actually, she's the first person to have won a case in California on a state level based on the 1996 or 98 was Proposition 215, and educated folks for a while on how to grow 6 of the largest plants possible that were still, and let me show pictures, they're massive trees that were still healthy and producing massive amounts of incredible cannabis. And I know that there's going to be limits and pushback to things like that, but I think fighting from the base of medical, fighting for nonprofit elements and models like co-ops is how we can start now when there's this long period of up to 2 years in some cases of implementation, that we can get things happening on the ground and fight for that to be reflected in legislation locally and on the state level. That really can be hopefully simple add-on legislation, and that allows for us to continue to build on this model, while hope the big money, they have to wait up until the point of implementation before they can really activate. And I think we really need to take advantage of that. So I also just said a lot, and I really want to hear what Pilar has to say on this as well.
Yeah, I have a lot. Like, yeah, like, reparations is like, it ain't, it's a lot. And it does scare me because, as a person who is very familiar with the politics of this state and in this country, it's very worrisome. It's also worrisome for me as a person, as an advocate, even a person who has even gone through a lot of different processes to just get assistance, like, let's say, one shot deal when you need money to get if you're in face of eviction. Like, the process itself is not fun. Having to answer these questions, having to prove yourself, it's really not fun. And in my opinion, for me, it has actually added more trauma. Like, I gotta prove. What do you mean? I gotta prove that I fell behind rent, whatever it is. And if I don't prove my story enough, then I'm not gonna get help. And so, it's definitely something I worry about, which is why why I can't stress again. Like, I'm gonna stress this too. Everyone is part of this. We have to be here together, fighting, saying what we want. Nope, we don't want that. Nope, we don't want that. Yes, we want that. That's what it's going to come down to. And really do it in a really united way, because, again, like I said, politics it's rough. And I don't even know who's going to be sitting on this board. So who even knows what they know about me and people like me from my community? So, I'm excited. Like, I'm not going to take away from the hard work that we've put in, but I am definitely worried. But also know that, we're living at a time, especially, a lot of things that have happened during COVID, in my opinion, have had people really become more conscious about really how kind of, for my opinion, oppressive and racist so many policies in this country are. And if you just like really stand up and unite, and here goes my Care Bear analogy that some of you may heard, we all got different skills. We just all unite like the Care Bears, all line it up, Care Bear stare, and can do great things and become more be powerful people, and you know overpower those people who don't have our best interest. And so if we want A, B, C, and D, then we got to tell them how we want it. And it ain't just the 5 or 6 people, or 7 or 10 or even 50, because how big is this state? And we smoke the most weed in the world. It was quoted years ago, 79 metric tons. Who knows what that looks like after COVID? And I think one of my friends said, we smoking more weed than people in Israel. No, anyway, like she was just saying, we're smoking a lot of weed. And so, yeah. It means we need a lot of reparations, all that to say. Sorry, I should have ended. Like, we're smoking a lot of weed, and it's been about, I was born in 1981, and I know that my father was being harassed and, violated when it comes to smoking weed, and people before that. So that's a lot of years of reparations. So what is that, what does that really look like? It ain't just, oh, give me 50%, but it's a start.
Happy to respond to something in the chat. But Pammy, also, I would love you to, if you had something you wanted to move to, just this question of, is it politically advised? Yeah, thank you, and Thank you for that, Pilar. I'm like pointing at me. I'm like, I'm smoking a lot of weed. So if I'm like, each person who's smoking a lot of weed is like, there's just so much. Like, did you ever walk down the street here? Anyways, but is it politically advisable to try to amend the statute before the issuance date if it's already not working? And the question is, why wait? And I think this might get to something later, and something I'm curious about, and part of this bill is like this local opt-in piece of it, where like towns and villages, yes, towns and villages, and not counties, it's cities, towns, and villages have a period before next December where they can, exactly, where they right now they're all automatically opted in and they have to pass something to opt out. And it has to be before December 31st. They can't opt out. I think Aaron had asked this question to me before. They can't opt out of like possession, like you're allowed to possess even in those counties. What they're really opting out of is like retail sale. And that's them losing tax revenue. So I'm not sure they will. And there's really no way for them to opt out of like delivery, like people will deliver into there, and there's really no way I think to stop that. But I think an area where it's interesting is it's like what is under the local jurisdiction's control. Like jurisdictions, like there are in the statute rules around how far it has to be from a school, how far it has to be from a church, but the localities in a lot of states can go further than that. So the point I'm trying to make is there might be things that are better done at the city level. Like it might be better if we think the statute's not right to like try and push for like more protections at the city, like the decrim type model. Great, town already booking. Awesome, Ethan. He said he's already trying to book a meeting with his town to ask and advocate. Because I just think like this massive boat that passed through the MRTA, like to try and go through and amend that. And I'm not sure that that is really the best use of energy when like it seems like local control is a lot. Like there is a lot of room for localities to make decisions about what they want. It is kind of funny in the bill, like after the localities don't opt out, it's like if the state wants to issue a license in a locality and the locality says like, oh, we don't want that, the state, it says in the statute, the state will say, okay, well, we take your opinion under advisement and we don't care and we can do whatever we want. So like localities lose a lot of control. So I actually think they might be mad at that. It says you have to give an explanation to the locality of how you considered their opinion, but you don't have to like abide by it. So I think a city like New York City is going to be mad at that. They're going to be like, we want this control. Like it's our, like we should be issuing, and we don't want dual licensing because that's more of a headache and more fees. But I think that to me is the area that's ripe. Just to address that in the chat.
Yeah, to also speak to this point, and I was a little bit eager because this did come up. Some of the things that Victoria was referencing as well came up in the previous call, in the Decrimination New York call, and what I'm learning about the opt-out elements, because that was a major, and it remains a major issue in California. The vast majority of the state, the localities of the state, do not have accessible cannabis. They don't have dispensaries. Many of them don't have real medical programs. That information was current 2 or so years ago. I'm hoping there's been improvement, but we have a much better possibility for that because of, and I think the home grow is a major, that's a major hack really, or just an element to that. And we hadn't discussed or considered the delivery element and also the regulatory motivations, because we did talk about how there's this window right now to advocate to municipalities and counties to encourage them not to opt out. And one of the areas I suggested that we come from is that the home grow is going to be happening, and groups and individuals and networks, myself very much included, are going to do everything possible to encourage people to home grow, to educate people about how to home grow, to create the models and the infrastructure to economically activate them. I'm talking to people that are within the cannabis investment space and that are interested in at least somewhat aligned about establishing local processing and getting really ahead of the curve on that, because then everybody growing is activated and has a place you can drop it off and monetize what you've grown. And there's much more, there's a commitment, and there's much more of a likelihood of there being local accountability with where the product and the profits and everything else goes. So I think that on the opt-out front, we're very well positioned, but it's also something that I think a lot of, as Victoria was indicating, a lot of counties and towns and regulators, it's going to be a lot easier for them to say, we're just opting out, even with some of these elements like home grow and delivery. It's just kind of easier. It seems easier for them on some fronts. So I'm really happy to hear even more about how we have an opportunity that I know we need to activate to encourage more and more places not to opt out on principle, but also on that makes a lot of sense because it's going to be happening anyways. And to speak to a point, I think one point that came across from a couple of the things that Pilar said which relating to both reparations and what we need to improve about this bill, is I think that we as advocates need to be very much results oriented. Is, you know, answering the question Pilar just said, what does reparations look like from a results level? This is what we need to see and what we need to be demanding while we work from within and without to make that happen. And that's, I think, how we build. We have, you know, simple messaging that builds a lot of power around that cause. So that's a lot, but really appreciate both of your input on that point.
Yeah, and I would just like add, because education is the biggest part, and like, you know, a lot of people in the coalition will say like they're just tired of educating these racist legislators over and over and over, because those people, those townships that these legislators are that are talking about opting out, if you hear their reasoning, it's really crazy. Like one of them was on the news saying, and I only know this because I had to respond to his comments. But he was talking about he's not taking no blood money. Oh, we don't want the gateway. You know, again, like these myths still exist, and it's, you know, I know it's just excuses for them to use, but that is just, it's still crazy that we're still dealing with that. And so we're dealing with that not only though in those legislators' minds. There's still a lot of people in my community and, you know, the Latino community, where grandparents will rather you drink than smoke weed, and it's still educating. So on top of all of that, what really really has to happen, and part of something we're, you know, I've been doing, and it's a goal all the time, is you just gotta educate the community. It's not one, oh, here we did two you know, town halls and there's all the information. It's really like being a consistent thing, because again, this is decades of, you know, of this mindset of marijuana is so scary. Like, I'm just like, can we stop with the smell? Stop saying the smell is bad. Like, I get it if people don't like tobacco and the smell in a tobacco roll up may not be your thing, but like to sit here and say that weed smells bad, I mean, maybe some people think this way, but do you think garlic smells bad? I love the smell of garlic, and it does such great wonders for you. I look at weed the same way. And so if we could also just get to this point, oh my God, I don't want the kids to smell weed. I get it though with the tobacco part, right? But I'm just like, why not? It smells great. But that's just my opinion. But everything to what you guys said, yes.
I agree with you. Sorry, Timmy. Go ahead. No, I agree with you. And the thing that's also so frustrating, it's like people act like you legalize it and it's changing, like it changes something in that people now need license, but people are already smoking. It already smells like pot everywhere. Like people are already driving high. People are like, all these things that are these fear tactics, like already happen. Like people are already doing them. And like, if we're not seeing mass problems from them, then like what's the problem? But just to your point too, in terms of education, one thing that really turned me off from this bill, and I was telling Pammy when I first logged on that this bill kind of radicalized me. Like I think I got used to like reading these kind of bills, but it's like, why do we have so much like there's just so much like overregulation and licensing and all, but I mean, I understand that's the game now. It is like how it is, and this is just another version of it. But at the very beginning of this bill, one of the explanations they give for why they're passing this bill is because current laws have been ineffective at deterring cannabis use. And for me as a patient, I'm like, is that even the goal? Like, can we think about this as a wellness, as a medicine? And there's also rules like you can't promote it as a wellness good. And like, there's more I could say on that, but just, it's really disappointing that even though this is like the justice bill and it's a great bill for what it is, which is like over regulating something that we should just be able to use however we want. Like it still is not from the frame of reference that this is like a thing that helps people, even though we have a medical program, even though the federal government has a patent on it as a medical use, even though we know that it helps people. So we are so far from where we need to be, I think, in terms of how people understand this plant and its role in helping us. I'm done.
Yeah,
I agree.
all these points, and I feel like, sorry, Pilar, I'd love to hear more of your points on this, but something that comes up from an advocacy perspective is I think we're really at the point that we have to be aggressive to some degree in confronting the absurdity of these arguments. It's something that we're confronting from the Hudson Valley Psychedelic Society and Decriminalize from legislators that should be relative to the state very progressive. And it's still that what about the kids argument? And what, so everybody's just going to be tripping on the street? And it's both of the points that you made are exactly points. People are already doing this. This isn't going to create more use. It's going to change the regulations around it and change elements of accessibility and change certain things, but it's not going to change that people can access these things and use them. And that also, I mean, I was reminded, Pilar, with the point you made about, the smell, what if my kids have to smell weed? It reminds me of the argument that for years was a primary argument against gay marriage. How will I explain to my kids of two men, that there's what it means with two men holding hands? And that transitioned over the course of certainly my lifetime, but a really short period of time, from being a fundamental reason that legislators would not consider legalizing gay marriage to this really absurd argument that people had immediate pushback against, like, that's your responsibility. That absolutely should not have any impact on people's ability to hold hands or anything, or any of these other things, which was also never really the issue. People have been smelling weed around the city for decades and decades. It's a very impacting city, and people smoke weed everywhere. So I think we've really got to be, and some of us are going to be working within spaces with legislators where you've got to respond to those questions, because those are the current gatekeepers. But I think even those of us, or those of you who are in the spaces doing that, need to be backed up by coalitions and by a grassroots that's really simple with the demands of that. Those questions are not relevant. There's so many responses to them, but the people that are asking those questions cannot be in any position to regulate these substances. So that's got a little soapboxy, but
Me too. It's just so angering. You're like, I can't believe we're still talking about this shit. Like, it's like not helping everyone who uses it. Not everyone, but.
We just have to just start talking to the kids at our 420 event, where we're gonna, God willing, we get the copy of the book in time, and we're gonna have while we're teaching the community about the MRTA, we're gonna have the kids learn about the plant, and if they have questions, because there's a book, a children's book, a marijuana children's book by Ricardo Cortez called "It's Just a Plant," and I hear he got some other books, and I'm a little sad he can't be with us to read it to the kids, but he's promised us next month he'll come read to the kids. But that's how we have to do it. It has to be all together, because again, this is programmed in there. It's like it's there, and it's like a leech that's just like holding on to this one area that's like, stop. It's not good. It's not good. They need shrooms to help them get past that dark shadow of theirs.
I don't know if this is a little off topic but I love the conversation about education. Honestly, that's like the beginning of everyone understanding, why we use this plant, what this plant is great for. And something came to mind when you guys were speaking about it. Do you guys remember the Truth campaign? Used to always be on like MTV, and I'm probably dating myself, but there's a truth campaign, and then obviously like the Got Milk,
anti-tobacco or something.
Yeah. Like those campaigns are so simple and so powerful, and it was just like kind of so educational. I think we need something like that. That's not like in your face, like, oh, you need to smoke weed, but just in your face with like simple facts. They're just saying, going counter against all of the like, oh, I can't stand the smell, or you know what I mean. Like, I feel like something like that needs, because I come from an advertising and marketing background, so this is where my brain is going. But yeah, I don't know. I know where I was going with that, but it just popped in my mind.
And I think that's why psilocybin is also like why we need it, because why people still have, like, in my opinion, have that like leech stuck there, especially in my culture, right? Why many of the grandmas again would rather have you be drunk than smoke weed is because marijuana brought some sort of violent trauma, even though alcohol did too, but the marijuana created something that really affected the financial, stability of the housing, a lot of things, relationships. And so a lot of folks still have that trauma, and, it's hard. Speaking for myself, it's hard. It's a PTSD. it takes some psilocybin and some other, very psychedelics to help in my experience and in my opinion. Um, so yeah, I would say, but that's a whole. Look at how we get with marijuana. Imagine the shrooms. Like my mom though is actually surprisingly like. So do you have that tea? And she's talking about shrooms because the weed. Unfortunately, she works for she had a bad experience, but with marijuana, she works for a federal employer, so she could be tested and lose her job, unfortunately. So she'd be asking me for my fungi tea, but not wanting to say she's like, and now really seeing or understanding what I'm saying when I talk about psilocybin. I'm sorry not to jump, but I'm just saying it's intersected. It's all related. It's like kumbaya.
Oh, go ahead, Vic.
Yeah, no, I guess I had two thoughts. I agree 100% on psychedelics and trauma, and it's so twisted that it's like you're a federal employer, so you're better off doing psychedelics than something that is decriminalized. It's so messed up. And I also think it's really interesting. Like my professional space is more as almost an attorney, and it's weird to me that like there are like and a lot of stuff. It's like there are cannabis lawyers and psychedelic lawyers, and they actually are like separate. Like I would go to a lot of conferences, and there's like the cannabis conferences and the psychedelic conferences, and there's not that much overlap. There's some overlap, but not a ton. And to me, like these are two things we're talking about in the same way, but because of like how the federal law treated hemp and psychedelic research in ways that are different from marijuana. So it's just like, I just agree with what she's saying, that it's all the same. And I like the same way that I feel like I wish that we had approached in retrospect, and maybe people did approach marijuana, I know, with decriminalization, but I'm getting really angry with legalization and criminalization 2.0. And I think psychedelics, people say, is trying to learn from what happened with cannabis, but I feel like cannabis is a psychedelic in some ways, and it is a medicine just like psychedelics are. And so we need to, a united front is like so necessary. And one other thing I wanted to say, which I think is just like so important in terms of education, is that actually like, and something that's sort of like, I guess something that we're losing by calling it adult use. Like people have moved away from calling it recreational, and now they're calling it adult use. But the thing is, like, kids are some of the like most needed like patients of medical marijuana. Like there's so much amazing work with like epilepsy, even with like ADHD, with children with autism, like tons of disorders where kids, and there's like protections starting to pop up in a place like Colorado or California, or I believe that it might have been in MRTA, but I would need to double check in terms of kids being able to access medicine while they're in school. But if we talk about this as like, well, it's just for adults, and it's only over 21, and we should, like, it's just like alcohol. And it's like, no, actually, like there are some really real medical uses for this, especially for kids. And there are like kids that have moved, like medical refugees, parents that have moved so that their kids can get this treatment. So I think like part of that advertising campaign that you should start, Pammy, should also just be that like, it's not adults only, like that this is like a medicine that can help everyone. And just like with psychedelics, people have been talking, they're going to start thinking about researching with kids, where it's like the sooner that you help a child process trauma they're experiencing, the less impacted they are into adulthood. So there's actually a lot of benefit to like giving kids psychedelics with a therapist in a controlled setting. But no one's going to want to hear that yet. But I think we need to be talking about
say
it.
That. That's a great conversation.
There
but
has
that's
to be
like,
talking about it.
But like how much do we spend? And this is, Noah totally gets this point. How much are we spending on mental health for kids? How much are we spending on drugs that are like, totally like not helping kids?
And not helping at all. Like if you look at the trains these days, I'm noticing it more and more. And I've lived in this city all my life, and I'm like, God, I don't have no shrooms on me. I'm like, and I know that's technically like not legal, but like, I'm like, I just want to make shroom tea for everybody, especially like, cause I'm like, it's bad. Especially, I'm noticing more and more youth. I mean, it's always been there, but like the other day I got on the train and it was like 4 different types of youth, it all high on, I don't know, but was not, it didn't look healthy. And I'm not judging here, but like it really, I'm an empath, so I feel it really affects me. And I was just like, damn, if we could, like you just said, it has to start young. And as a person who is like, can speak for my experience and what it's done for me, I'm like, and I'm not even like there, I'm still going, And so yes, we have to be able to talk about it, and it's nothing like fucking alcohol. And I don't even like that in the bill, in the MRTA, we're even talking about marijuana, like tobacco and alcohol, like you said. And then there's even sections like, oh, I think for the medical part, and forgive me, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't like reading the law, but I read it, some of it, and I was like, oh, okay, how I read this is, in order for me to be considered a medical marijuana patient, I have to be now labeled disabled. That's how I read that somewhere. And I was like, what? I'm not disabled. If I fucking want a medical marijuana card, I just want to enjoy myself. This is my medicine. Why do I have to be disabled? Disabled, I'm able to do a lot of things. That's why I smoke my weed and take my shrooms.
I 1,000% agree with you. It's actually interesting because right now I'm working for a civil rights litigation nonprofit in Manhattan. So doing actually like housing and employment discrimination and all kinds of like civil rights type work. And that actually is a good thing, I think, having it as disability, because that allows you to then claim that your employer is not accommodating you. So I hear what you're saying, which is like, it's not a disability, but like I'm actually working on a case right now with a person who's an alcoholic, and that's considered a disability under the law. And so if they can like accommodate you, and the city has very favorable civil rights laws. So like, it's like, okay, well, like, let's say they decided that, I mean, this is all about like disclosure and being fired or hired or accommodation. But let's say you're working a job where they can't fire you for being a patient, and they actually would have to say like, oh, well, you're using more cannabis right now, and we think that would impair your ability to do this job. We actually have to give you another opportunity to do another job that we think might not impair. So they have to give you accommodations. So I agree with you, but I think in some ways that's like, could be a good thing. But I also don't, I'm conflicted about if alcoholism should be a disability that should be accommodated, but I think accommodation is generally a good thing.
So the thoughts, and I have a lot based on everything that was just said, and a lot of really amazing points. I think one that's coming up, Victoria, from what you said, is that also that I think that also speaks to the level of incrementalism we're dealing with, that this certain things, and I think this speaks to a really good point of this bill, is that so much of this cannabis bill is based on contributions from activists and advocates that are not necessarily all coming from just a cannabis base, that there's a lot of people coming from from other justice concerns, and that's reflected in a lot of this bill. But that also, what you're mentioning speaks to lots of problematic elements about how what's determined to be a disability, how that's regulated. As I can relate to Pilar. I went and got a medical cannabis card. I'm encouraging people that want to do that, but fundamentally, to speak to the point we're making, that shouldn't be any of their business, and nobody should have to declare a disability to access this plant. And so that's, I think that's very valid. But to speak to one of the earlier points that Pammy was speaking on as well, Pilar, what you were talking about is education, direct education to kids. That, to me, that's the grassroots approach, and also the winning approach to counteracting this whole "what about the kids" discussion, and to educate and to do what needs to be done. And I think this is where people can really activate, Pammy, as you mentioned, background in advertising, people that can bring in that element of creativity and of talent in bringing messages that aren't diluted, that can be represented into cannabis advocacy, that really push us directly past and directly confront the whole "what about the kids" thing, and what about the smell, and all these other absurdities that end up working into more barriers to what we're already acknowledging, which is that this plant should be accessible at the very least to any responsible adult. And one other point to something that Victoria said is that to agree with what you said, is that we've really got to start looking at bills like this as a basement, rather than and this speaks to a lot of why I came to New York from California, was to counter this thing. Well, we've got to do legalization like they did in California. Even if California legalization is or was the gold standard, which I don't think it ever was, that even then, and especially then, should be looked as the basement of what we've got to work off of. And that's what people in psychedelic advocacy, I think, really have to do. I actually was just reminded, that's right, this is the psychedelics is more the base of this sisterhood and call. But I think that's something we've also got to learn in psychedelics, is to use this as a starting point to push legislation further, to push access further, and then that hopefully includes cannabis and everything that people need to access. And the absurdity of the arguments over this, when we've been feeding amphetamines to kids for now a generation or so, is yeah, you've all said it.
The pharmaceuticals are profiting off of the kids and the families and killing them at the end of the day. Like, I can't imagine what that's doing to their brain cells, but I'm sure it's not doing what psilocybin and cannabis does, which I have positive things. So, my experience, my opinion.
Also, at the pocket level, it's not doing the same for sure. You know what I mean? With pharmaceuticals, you're constantly having to buy, you know, pills constantly every month, take them every day. And, with psilocybin, um, you can take some for months without like having to even think about it. And you're given it like a new, I want to say new lease on life, but you're essentially given a new lease on life for at least a little while. And that's just something that's amazing just to start with. And I think that's where most of that fear from those other companies come from, is not having the guaranteed money, especially when it comes to children. Diagnosing them when they don't have issue, they have a few symptoms. They're like, well, let's just diagnose. Let's give them on this, medication, even if they don't need it. But we'll see what happens. And that's kind of just like playing with people. You know what I mean?
I watched a documentary years ago. I don't remember the name right now. And it was about psychotropic drugs in the pharmaceutical industry, and how, like, a lot of these doctors who label people with these diagnoses so that then they can prescribe them these medicines. But anyway, it's a great. I thought it was a great documentary. But what really stood out to me, especially like when my grandmother passed away, I truly believe Aricept and Zoloft are the reasons why she lost her life. But obviously, how can I prove that? But I watched this documentary, and they said the 5 top psychotropic drugs, the pharmaceutical makes 5 billion in profits with a B. So that's like after they paid the bills, they making, and that's just 5. So I was like, whoa. And that is, so they're literally making profits by killing us, and then criminalizing us for choosing things like medicine, like cannabis and psilocybin. And it's, so that's why the education is really important, because I know a lot of people in my community don't put together. You could see them at the pharmacy lined up. Oh, I need my pills because the doctor said, and this medicine, the way we look at medicine, this is it. And really, like, what's in those pills? I worked at Pfizer Pharmaceutical in clinical trials. I worked in a lot of different parts of Pfizer for 5 years. And yeah, yeah, they're not good. It's not, I don't know what it is, but they're making money. And then we're going to jail for trying to make money and help our family. And here these people are killing us and profiting, and then getting awards, and have vacation homes and avoid everything, making vaccines now.
I want to respond to that, because something that really worries me about the MRTA, and like I think education is 100% a huge piece of it, but there's a whole, in the section around and this is on this point, on the section around the Cannabis Control Board, they talk about like that it's the sole discretion of the Cannabis Control Board to ensure products are not packaged, marketed, or otherwise sold in a way which targets minors or promotes increased use or cannabis use disorder. And it concerns me because it seems like it's an easy way for them to limit THC content, which I'm also really concerned about in terms of like medicine. So on this note, exactly, like my dad actually right now, like he is a cannabis user and also has used other psychedelics, but right now he got prescribed by a doctor to take benzos like 24/7. He's taking benzos, and it's like, as you see him, he's like what you were describing, Pilar. You're like, you're on something that is not like, you're just not yourself, and this is, but like a doctor prescribed it, and so I'm taking it. But the thing is, like, he also could be taking high dose cannabis. Like, he actually has a medical card in New York, but it's so prohibitively expensive, and there are THC limits, that like those things together are like, well, why would I pay so much for a medicine that like the doctor's not prescribing me cannabis, they're prescribing me Klonopin, so I should be taking Klonopin? And it's like, well, like also it's just so cost prohibitive. And like the whole point I think about THC content is actually has nothing to do with mental health. It has nothing to do with anything. It has to do with making money. The lower the THC content, the more that people will buy. The more that people buy, the more money, the more tax revenue they can make. That's like what it comes down to. So I'm really concerned about that. and how much power that board has in general, but that specifically, and it's something we're going to have to fight, I think, a lot for. THC. Actually, I've been really feeling like what Aaron was saying, sorry, just to finish this thought, but in terms of like these alternative, like decriminalization or religious-based use, like I'm not sure, like you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, because the problem is like these pharmaceutical companies, that industry, they're trying to get into this industry, meaning that like they're trying to turn this into that kind of drug. And one of the ways they can keep making money is by limiting THC content, and like making it into like a drug that, I heard this phrase yesterday in Clubhouse, someone said, legislating for scarcity. And that is exactly how I read this. They're legislating in a way to limit caps, limit who can buy, limit how much you can access. And so you'll still have to need pharmaceuticals. And that's why home grow is so important, community-based healing, learning how to make these things into medicine for ourselves. But I'm worried about it. And I agree exactly with what Pilar is saying.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts and appreciate that. And that point about legislating for scarcity, I think, speaks to a part of the point that I was gonna make, is that we have a system that's based on scarcity. We should not be expecting them to legislate for anything else. They're going to legislate for the status quo. So we've got to fight against for that, but we shouldn't be expecting otherwise. And it's something I continue to see and push back on in advocacy, is this idea that, oh, they just need to see the science. They just need to see what's right and wrong here, and then they're going to do the right thing. And that doesn't happen and hasn't happened to this point. And of course, I agree with what you were saying in agreement to what I was saying about the nonprofit and the religious approach, because overall, and this is relevant to my approach in psychedelics and in reintegrating psychedelics and in taking a religious approach to that, I founded a religious 501c3 nonprofit, a Jewish religious nonprofit, and working with networks of other religious people. That's coming from the basis of that our legal approach really is that our right to relate to plants, nature, ourselves, and our community is that's a precursor to things like the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States doesn't give me the right to practice my religion or cognitive liberty. It codifies those rights. It recognizes those as being natural. So anything that stems from the U.S. Constitution or legislation that impinges on those rights is invalid. And that, of course, is not necessarily advice that I'm giving people to take in cultivating cannabis and stuff, though it's a model that's growing and hopefully will continue to. But I think we need to be coming on a demands level and what we can build from a nonprofit basis that's around this idea that it's not their right or anyone's right to legislate on things like THC content, because I'm also very concerned on that really being, I see that kind of the way we have these sort of these openings, these like I guess the hacks or whatever it is, however people want to describe it, that's sort of an opposing one where that can really be used exactly as you said to really control from that point what's able to come out and come onto the market. And so I think what we need to do again is to create the models for systems that go around that. And part of that will be, well, we're not going to sell this. This isn't going to be in the dispensaries. So therefore, and also I feel important to have a nonprofit element because that puts things outside of the taxation structure. And that's what they use. That's how they make a taxation and regulation system for cannabis and everything else. And that's what they're using with the THC as to tax it the higher it is. So that's one of the simple responses to that is to have tax-free models. There's some thoughts on that one.
I would just want to add that something that I found that was really actually interesting in the bill that might be useful for this kind of argument that we're talking about is that they talk about like schools can't discriminate against people, but then they have a little subclause that says that schools cannot be forced to tolerate cannabis users if their religious beliefs prohibit cannabis use, which to me, I feel like opens the door. Well, like if your religious beliefs could prohibit it, then shouldn't your religious beliefs be able to like, so to me, like I read that and that was actually one of the most exciting things I read in the whole bill. I was like, hey, they're acknowledging that like there's a relationship between religious beliefs and cannabis use. And although you could definitely draw that and say like, oh, well, it's not about that. It's more about, like prohibition on substance use. I actually still think we could draw that line backwards. So I want to try and do that. I think just in this conversation, I'm like, what if we tried to do like decriminalizing the religious-based use or something. The problem is like outside of the, like it's still just heavily criminalized outside of the the regulated model. Like there's no language in the whole bill that says that any individual can sell or you can give to another individual. So I think, I mean, that might also be sort of the legal gray area where it's like if we have a co-op model where I'm not selling you anything, I'm gifting it to you. But they say barter for anything, so I'm not sure.
So that really speaks to the model that I've been coming from for a while of why it's so important to have religious and nonprofit models. And I think that also speaks to something that was brought up here. Noah was mentioning, do we go after this bill right now? And there's going to be pushback for people doing things like that are based on this isn't good enough while everybody's still celebrating and patting themselves on the back. But to say things like, hey, here's an oversight that could make a difference down the road, that we want to make sure that we've got the basis for a religious and a nonprofit element codified into this and worked into this and amended into this, that I think could be an easier ask. And then we need to know what we're going to do with that. And hopefully that also provides the model for psychedelic legalization, and that maintains what will, based on current projected models, what would be a very small element of the industry, because you can't sell, because we're going to basically take that on, that we're agreeing to not be able to commercialize and push for things like co-op models and club models and and other ways of doing that, maybe through education, other ways of just sustaining. But I think that speaks to why it's so important and why that's where I think we can expect to have the most success over the course of this next really crucial 6 months, 18 months, and 2 years.
I just want to circle back just a little bit, just for my own understanding. There's language in there about the licensing, about having to have a medical marijuana license or a license to use for adult use. Is that the only way that it's legal for people to have a license to just use it, or just to have a medical marijuana license, or also to sell it in the next 6 months, 18 months?
So that is if I understood your question correctly, you're talking about in the time between now and when home grow is legal?
Yes.
So that to me is a big question mark that I'm also concerned about, because like in the NYPD memo, they kind of like list some of the things that are updated, but part of that updated list is that like there's these new criminal penalties for what they call, and this is a whole other thing that's going to be a problem and going to need education around, what is illicit cannabis versus what will eventually be legal home grow. And what they call illicit cannabis is any cannabis that's not bought like from the tax regulated market. Now, how you're going to be able to tell what is illicit cannabis versus what is, I grew this at home and my friend gifted it to me, unknown. I think another area where they could target people. But it seems like anyone who's operating right now in what used to be a decriminalized gray model, although I can't quite remember what the penalties were for distribution under the prior decrim, but they are they're operating with potentially a misdemeanor or a felony under the law as it is now, even though the MRTA passed. So whether or not those people will be targeted is kind of another question. I think the fact that the police can't just stop people from marijuana might incentivize them to go after people who are still selling illegally. I guarantee you that once they license people, they're definitely going to be going after people that are operating illicitly to protect their money interests in the legal market. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah. You did. Sorry, did I just spelled some mic? I'm sorry.
A lot of folks, a lot of people in the illicit market that I know, they're excited, especially, because, I myself, one fun fact about me, I'm not a big fan of government. I don't like this idea of a group of people making decisions on my behalf and saying, oh, but you voted for me. But I understand the value and the importance of being part of these process and being in the room and playing chess, their game, right? But it is worrisome because, again, people like I said, mentioned earlier, this process that one is going to have to go through to get a license, the paperwork, the attorney. There's not a lot of great attorneys out there, I'm going to tell you. There's a lot of bad attorneys out there. And I don't want to say that because there's a lot of great attorneys, and I work with a lot of them, especially ones that are more focused on community lawyering. And that's really important because, again, as a person of color, it's been also another part of trauma where we've had people like lawyers say they're going to help us, and then what happens? We spend all this money and then it doesn't work in our favor. And we have these expectations because we also, you know, whatever anyway, it's just been an additional trauma towards us, and so that it's like people are just gonna be like, I don't want to do this. I'm gonna stay in the illicit market, but I have had to like really rethink about this, and my partner like helped me really be focused about this. And like now when I talk to my people, it's like I'm with you. I don't like paperwork. I give some please. Let me talk to everybody, and I help build and door knock for hours. But if you want me to like do paperwork where this legal language, please, I'd rather someone just sit with me, be a leader, and help me understand this. But like just yeah, anyway, but it costs more money if you think about it to stay in the illicit market, because then now you're still being, even though the criminalization is not as hard as it was before legalization, you're still going to get fined or criminalization somehow, which is going to cost you money. You're going to need an attorney, which is going to cost you money, and then who knows how long that's going to drag out. So it at the end of the day, it comes out in a benefit for us to get out of the illicit market. But I also recognize that the pathway there is not easy, even though we're trying to make it easy. But and we have to understand that people are going to need real, assistance, real assistance. And I like stress real, because people say, "Oh yeah, let them out of prison." I'm like, yeah. But what happens when they release them? Where are they going? Where's the housing? What type of financial stability are you creating for them? Like equity, what does that look like? When someone comes out of jail, the city likes to say that there's all these programs, but it ain't real.
Yeah, I think just to hopefully very briefly add on to agree with what Pilar said, I think that I fundamentally agree on not trusting a bunch of people, particularly the people that have been in this position, to make decisions. And I think to take it to where we're all aligned when it comes to psychedelics, cannabis, and drugs, certainly these people should not be having authority over me, you, or anyone, and making decisions around them. And we have to keep kind of coming back to and reiterating that point, because you're speaking once again to, I think, all the reasons that these things need to happen, and we can't trust them to do that. That's a really fundamental point about decarceration, is what's going to happen to people once they're decarcerated. And that's another area where I think we've got to start answering those questions and making demands, because we have to make the decarceration happen, and we also can't trust the system to either do the decarceration or legitimately provide, as they haven't, for the commitments they've made to homelessness in the city, to all sorts of other programs that they haven't legitimately then funded and supported. So I think that's also really important to take into account while we celebrate and we push forward and we build progressively, to recognize that we're building towards things that we also have to have the preparations for and the support for, because we can't expect them and the top-down structure to provide that.
Just want to, I agree with all of that, and I like taking it in, and there was just so much systemic stuff here that like legalizing one drug and then like making it's just like not going to solve all the problems. But I want to jump in on the lawyer point, which is just like so infuriating, that it's like this bill is really long because like it doesn't need to be this long. This process doesn't need to be so complicated. Like it's like, the tax code is another example of this in general, where it's like, let's make this so complicated that we can like make ourselves like a commodity, so that people will need our expertise to be able to navigate it. And I myself have been really frustrated with like lawyers in general and cannabis all over this country who are like, we're going to like make money off the process. We're going to make money helping people apply for licenses, but with no guarantee that they're going to get licenses. And like, it's still unclear how competitive the New York licenses are going to be. But there are lawyers that are literally just making a living off of like people who are putting everything they have into getting licenses that they are pretty sure they're not going to get. And like, it's these lawyers, like, this is like how they need to, like, they're like, well, I need this to survive. And like, the truth is, it doesn't need to be this complicated. It could literally be like a Google survey. It could literally be like a little short, this is my bit. Like, I think a state like Oklahoma is an amazing example. Pay a fee, put in a piece of paper, start your business. If you fail, then like you fail, but like make it easy to enter the market. Like give people, and It's like I've like I said, the reading the MRTA radicalized me. I don't want to help people with licensing. I mean, I want to help people who need help with licensing because it's a shitty system. But like I myself do not want a career in that. Like I don't think that's really ethical. I think this like system is like just so like I could keep going on about it. But just know that like your suspicions about lawyers are totally spot on, and any lawyer who's like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna guarantee you get a license and bill you hourly for my time spent, and like the truth of the matter is like this is not legal work. It's only legal work because they made the regulations so complicated that lawyers are the only ones who are trained to like decipher them.
Read it. You're the only ones that could read the whole "and then thou shalt" and live. It's like, what can you just use?
To experience I had in California that validates all of that is I found out when I started reaching out to and working with in California with some activist lawyers, certainly not all of them, but that a lot of the lawyers working on legislation, I found out, well, they're working to write the legislation to leave in specific complicated elements, to leave in things that leave plenty of work for lawyers. And so that's a fundamental issue across the board with that's happened so far. So totally validating both of you on that. And agree from experience.
Well, and the other big thing is like these big law firms that are like experts in this, like their clients are big multi-state operators. And so when they're advocating for legislation, they're actually like, this is something I keep running up against. Like I'm a patient. Like I've been a patient in California for 5 years. I was a patient in California for 4 years, or excuse me, 5 years in New York, 4 years for California before that. Like when I think about like how the law should be, I think about like how can we create patient access. But when you're a lawyer whose clients are big businesses, you have a totally different way of thinking about how the bill should look like. It looks more like the CRTA, but and this is something we wanted to talk about. Like this, there's going to be a notice and comment period on the regulations, and some of these firms are going to have lawyers who are reading these regs and making suggestions. And I think that's a space where like organized community groups and decrim groups and like Pilar, the groups that you work with, like it's hard though because it's already in legalese. It's like how do you like it's just giant gates, just giant barriers, and just like thinking about decrim. And like I wish I wasn't so cynical. It's exciting, but it's
No,
also like
it's all right. I share those same things. I'm like, yes, but I'm like, oh, I know tricks. I'm like, I have yet to be wrong. So I'm like, here I am still fighting for basic rights like housing. So,
yeah.
I think,
I was going to respond to the thought on the use technology to help people get the license, a virtual lawyer. There are movements of people that want more like open source licensing, but it's just like, I mean, I've worked on some of these licenses depending on what it looks like you're supposed to be like drafting narratives. It's like creative writing. It's like putting out what your team is. I mean, it does take some like, it's not there yet. I mean, once there are federal licenses, which is a whole other federal thing is going to be a mess. Like you might be able to have a virtual lawyer. Yeah, that was just responding to that. Pammy, what were you going to say?
I was going to say you both brought up a really good point. But we are going to have to curb the conversation right now. We're getting a little later in the hour. I want to ask, what can we do as far as like, for instance, like pushing up the home grow deadline or, or getting the people that are trying to like go beyond building the framework, how we can make things more, for ourselves and not for big business, and what can we do in that sense? Because for what I've been reading and from the notes and everything, it just seems like it's disheartening in a way. Like everyone is excited that it's legal, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna grow, or everyone's gonna have a plant in their living room, or her friends are coming over, we're gonna, grind it up and smoke, and everything's cool. We're going to the beach, whatever, smoke. But it's not that simple. I would love it to be. Not that we're not doing that already, but legally, it's just not that simple, especially when it comes to home grow. And it's beyond me why it's not the same as like growing cilantro, you know what I mean, on your windowsill. It's bananas. But what can we do to kind of curb it more towards that home grow sort of, I don't know, thing? What can we do for that?
Well, I have a very quick answer to that I know is coming from outside legal perspective, and I'm sorry for jumping in front of that, but I think that to speak from my experience and those like myself that see the opportunity and that they're not going to have pushback, I think civil disobedience is a really good idea right now. There's less and less regulation over this. Push, we've all been, this is not really radical thing to say until like a week ago, we've all been breaking the laws to some degree in order to do this and not being particularly private about it. So I would say for those that are at a level of activation or privilege to be able to do things like publicly push the lines on, or publicly, privately, or on whatever level to push the lines on these, on levels that are aligned with justice, but not necessarily with this this regulation. I think that's an important thing to do, and I think it's really important that we were talking about PR and outreach and stuff like that. It's really important that we frame all of this, cultivating cannabis, cultivating psilocybin as being nonviolent, extremely nonviolent, pro-peace, civil disobedience in any arena where it's illegal or overly regulated. To make that a little more clear, break these laws.
Loud and clear.
I never have a problem with that, which is why I'm always in trouble and why they call me Pilar La Problema sometimes.
Do whatever you can, problem for them, and I think I'll stop there because I know that Victoria has what to say on this for sure.
No, I mean, I'm enjoying this conversation so much too. Like people that are just, I'm learning so much from you and enjoying this so much because I feel like we're all like seeing this plant the same way and just talking about how to, make it better for everyone and learning from each other. What I was gonna say is I love the idea of like nonviolence and civil disobedience as like sort of like an organizing tactic. I've studied Gandhi some. I went to seminary and I just think like there's just power to that. Like I don't think I thought about it that way. Like breaking these laws as civil disobedience, and I just love that so much. And then from the lawyer perspective, I'm not a lawyer yet. I'm not licensed. So, we're definitely not supposed to encourage breaking the law, but there's also this weird thing in like the legal world, which kind of really annoys me that like, if you want to bring a lawsuit, you need to have standing. So in order to have standing, you need to have an injury. And in order to have an injury, someone has to try and enforce the law against you. So there are like cases, for example, where like a cannabis church in New York is trying to seek what's called injunctive relief, a declaration from the state that says, we can legally use this for our religious beliefs. And the government will say, well, you don't have standing. We're not trying to like enforce a law against you. There's no injury here. So I actually think that like, like what you're encouraging people to do, which I can't, or the work that like people are doing, like is not only necessary from like a civil disobedience, like nonviolence, like people power, but I also think like it will lead to the potential for more change. But I mean, as a lawyer, I'm not a soon-to-be lawyer. I'm not convinced lawsuits actually, Brown v. Board happened however many years ago, and schools are still segregated. So lawsuits are definitely not the be-all, end-all. But I would just add that injury is a part of it.
Yeah, all of that and breaking the law. I'm all about civil disobedience. I've been arrested a few times for civil disobedience and just for being a Latina. But yeah, and again, like I've said, education, community. We need to work together, and I know that that's harder. Especially because of the history of how we've been raised, what's in our DNA. We live in this world of hierarchy and big capitalism, and so it's hard to make decisions together in a united way. And I'm talking about community, not the legislators. Because like I said, like I always find it interesting when people are like, no, you have to vote and all this. I'm like, so you're telling me that I'm too stupid to make decisions on my own, but I'm smart enough to elect someone to make those decisions for me. Okay. But anyway, so all that to say is that, yeah, that's why we have to organize in our community, and how we get to radical levels is by organizing, working together. Again, like the Care Bear Stare, all of these skills that we all have, all of this background, our cultures, that all is part of us, and that is valuable. And it's unfortunate, though, in this society, in this country, you have to have had certain numbers of checks, right, to be considered an expert in something. And I consider myself an expert in a lot of things. And I don't have a degree. I didn't go to college. I did finish high school, but I didn't go to college. Do I want to go to college? No. I have the education of what is the Jay-Z said, the street of hard knocks life, you know? And so I'm an expert. And I think that we our legislators don't recognize that. And I know this for a fact as someone who's ran for office twice. They don't look at us as experts because you didn't go to this, you didn't have this check on your resume or whatever it is that they call it. And, you know, that's, you know, also been something that's put, unfortunately, I think is, you know, messed with, especially people in my culture, in my community, with their, you know, how much they believe in themselves, and, you know, and they don't then pull through, and they just give up. And so then that's why too psilocybin comes in and helps with those things if you microdose. But yeah, I can go on and on, but just like we really have to work together, especially us. Like here, we're so like-minded. I also love it that I can speak like this because I've been in many places and spaces where it's like, Pilar, no, you're too radical, and I'm like, what? What's too radical at this point? Like what? You seen what I go through every day? What do you mean? I'm beat up every day by the system, every day by the hour. I'm too radical. Shit, you lucky. I could be some, you know. Anyway, but yeah, it's up there. Hansu, who never knows watching.
Oh gosh. So I
And
want
to
to.
that point, I guess I just wanted to make a sort of semi-disclaimer because I did make that thing about break the law, and Victoria made this point too, is you really got to kind of know, that was the sort of the disclaimer to that, is know where you're coming from that. If you're in that position as an educator, perhaps a social worker, a lawyer, it's possibly and probably not a good idea for you to be directly advocating for people to break the law, and why it's so important that there's people working in the different places and that those of us activated to can be encouraging that or doing that, but also really set, you know, harm reduction, best practices, safety are really important for you to be aware of. Even though it's unjust for anybody to not be able to say, hey, I smoke marijuana and so should you, and take psilocybin and all of that. So I just want to add that disclaimer.
Can I jump in for a second just to agree, but especially with Pilar was saying, like Pilar, you are way more of an expert on this plant and these substances than like most of the people that are out here like claiming to be experts, and lawyers and speakers and business people and investors,
And they
like
getting all the money, and I'm here doing it for free.
It's
Not that I care about the money like that, but I'm just saying,
no.
profiting off of my fucking experience in my life. Poverty pimps, I like to call them.
And like Aaron and I were talking about this, something that I'm going to struggle with as an attorney. Like I want to give all the stuff and knowledge I have for free because I want to further these causes that I believe in. But like the information and the expertise that you have and you both have, all three, I mean, everyone in the space have, is like so valuable, but it's like, what are we putting it towards? But I think it's like, I grew up in a very different space. I grew up in a lot of privilege and have a lot of checks on my my resume. And like, I feel like I've been trying to like use that to like further. It's like, how can I use what I've been given to like, you know, have a piece of paper that makes people think that I'm like serious and educated, and yet still be like a radical, like within those systems and like be in those spaces. But, you know, like nothing that I'm trying to do can be done without your expertise. So I'm just like so grateful to, you know, be in conversation with you and like know that if my piece of paper can be a resource to you, like use it, you know, like, but like, it's just a piece of paper and it has no bearing. And I just agree with that so much. Yeah, I'm glad you said it, but it's so stupid. And it's also expensive, all this education shit. It's like intentionally, like oppressively expensive to keep people out. And it's not even, the education's not even that good. You can get much better education in schools that aren't so expensive. They just sound good and they have the brand. And I could also rant about this.
They got better vocabulary too.
But not.
They come with value though. It does bring, there's value to it, but it's like, again, it's not something like what we just said.
Yeah, no. We like, but for me, it's like, okay, well, if I can do this stuff without becoming in debt because I have certain resources, whatever, then that's like my way of like serving the community, is like taking advantage of the system and then using it against itself.
Sorry.
No, no
It's time.
apologies whatsoever. Come on, please. I want to thank you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are amazing. This discussion has brought so much light to just my understanding of what the bill stands for and what we can do as far as going forward to make things just a bit better for everyone. All of you, like, I'm no expert, I don't know these legal terms either, so I really appreciate, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate you guys.
But we're all experts in something. That's the thing. Remember, like I said, the Care Bear, we're all like here.
I'm gonna start using the Care Bear stare.
That's
I
And yeah, and to add to Pilar's point and what Pammy's saying, that's so important that we continue to make the point and activate people that there's so much you can do not being an expert and not even losing yourself in that, because the fundamental points, the starting points that brought so many of us here, the justice points, the basics that we keep coming back to, that this should be accessible to anybody, this never should have been criminalized. Those are the points to keep making and to keep stating over and over again, louder and louder until those get across. So we're really, one of the great things about this bill, and it's something good to build off of, something at least relatively significantly good to build off of, is that to go to a demand level means less and less people now need to be digging into understanding every element of the legislation, which, as Pilar indicated and everybody did, it is built by design to keep as many people out of it as possible, like a lot of the results have usually. So that's to hopefully speaks to another really positive point of this legislation.
I think this will be a good time. Thank you, Aaron, for that. I think this will be a good time to open up to question answer. However, everyone that joined bounced. We have Ethan left. So Ethan, you've been pretty active in the chats. Thank you so much for your points and your questions. They've been amazing. Feel free to unmute your mic and ask questions, or if you have any comments for Victoria, Pilar, or Aaron, feel free.
Thank you so much. Such an amazing conversation, right? As a lifelong resident in New York and just always an advocate for cannabis, and I'm a dad raising a son mostly by myself. I do have some help from family and very close friends and my girlfriend and stuff like that, but she's at a distance. But looking to start a cannabis business in New York. Been a lifelong kind of goal to advocate for this in New York and just be like educate people around it, and it's encouraging to hear all this discussion and to see this law pass. And I from the other laws that I've seen around the country, I think that it's a pretty good start, right? It's a good place to be. I think it's one of the better laws out there, at least, but it's going to take all you guys to make it work. And I don't know, like I'm encouraged by the grassroots feeling. It's super cool, and I want to know what I can do to help, right? And I have so many questions about like starting a business and all that, but I think it goes a lot deeper than that, and it's educating community and reaching out, and yeah, I so many questions. I can't think of one specifically. Thank you for your time, though. Just trying to think if there is a single question. There's so many. Like, where would I go to find a lawyer that's cannabis friendly? Aaron, like, how do I reach you? I found, I think, your webpage. I want to reach out to you. I'm also in New York, and yeah, it's just, I think a lot of people want to get involved and don't know how. And that's what's so incredible about what just happened here in the last few weeks. And I think so many people have been pushing toward this and just need a lot more information. And I know we're waiting for this board to be created and tell us all the licensing and everything like that. But I'm sure everybody has a billion questions. And how do we help the people that need it the most? Like Pilar was saying, like, you know, the law has a lot of words in there as I read the bill about how some of the money is going to go toward, the places that were damaged the most by the current laws, and how there's going to be a load of free loans for people to hopefully pay for the lawyers that they need to get to start these businesses. Like, what do we do to make this stuff happen? That's, I guess, the ultimate question I'm sure everybody here is asking. Any thoughts?
I'm putting some stuff in the chat. One thing I put is the canbar.org, which is there's an International Bar Association of Cannabis Lawyers, and they have a directory of lawyers that are like cannabis lawyers. I can't tell you they're all great, but those are all cannabis friendly lawyers. And you could also reach out to me. I mean, I'm not a lawyer yet, but I might be able to recommend some good people depending on what kind of lawyering you want. The other thing I threw in the chat was they put live the Office of Cannabis Management website, and they have a section on licensing where that's where they'll be releasing information when it comes out around like how to apply for licensing. There actually is a lot of good information on there too. I was actually surprised that they tried to like break out the law into ways that are digestible. So yeah, Aaron, I think you wanted to say something. I just wanted to explain what I threw in the chat that hopefully can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ethan, I would love to. I'm happy to coordinate directly, and really would love to have that conversation for many reasons, including that I would like to be positioned and be working with networks and people to answer exactly those questions, because there's already sort of the industry standard responses, and you see that reflected in a lot of the headlines of like, marijuana is legal in New York. What does that mean for the stock market? And as opposed to answering this question, what does that mean for people that want to ethically, regeneratively, in a way that benefits their community and also allows them to sustain, get into this business? And I think one answer is it's really important you're doing the right thing. It's really important to start asking and answering these questions now, when you've got time to figure out how you kind of operate as somebody that's presumably going small relative to the big actors who by design aren't going to be able to fully get in for another 1.5 to 2 years. So it's really taking advantage of what you have working in your favor, and hopefully some of the stuff that was mentioned that I think I've mentioned the cannabis compassion programs in California, and a lot of that is built around how you build a nonprofit element to this business. We're talking about revenue generating, sustainable businesses that can allow somebody exactly like you, a dad raising a 10-year-old son looking to get into the cannabis business, to be able to do that in a way that's sustainable and benefits you, your family, and your community. So happy to coordinate directly on that. And that would be really beneficial to me in working on the things we mentioned, the educational programming and outreach that answers that question, brings it up and answers it during this crucial period now, the next 6 months, 18 months, and 24 months, as we mentioned, those kind of different blocks.
And I would just add, like, I mean, this is a little off, it's related, but like not the same. But I would also encourage, and something I don't know if it's in the bill because I don't remember ever discussing it, but or how it would work out. But because we're talking about lawyers, there's a lot of folks who do want to be lawyers, right? And there's a lot of people in my community who do think that the lawyer, and they look, there's we need more Black and Latinos to lawyers. And so it would be great, to also, I'm starting to encourage folks who are like, into going to law school, think about becoming a cannabis lawyer, like I mentioned earlier, or folks who are in prison for cannabis, allow them to get barred to become cannabis lawyers. I don't know what that will look like from prison, if this and figure out how they get out of prison that way. But like, there's I take that from forgive me for not knowing his name, but it's based on that show For Life, where gentleman went to prison for 10 years for a crime he didn't commit and was able to get barred with the state in prison, and actually reappealed his case and won and was released. And so again, the experts, we're the experts, and there are a lot of folks who are in prison right now learning the law because they have, not to say this in a mean way, but they have time, right? So why not allow them to rehabilitate and get reparations by allowing them to become lawyers in this way, and letting them come out of prison so that they can open their own law firm, or mentor with big good law firms. I don't know what the ones, maybe some Victoria would know some, but yeah, that's how I would love to see too. Because again, when we talk about getting in the cannabis business, it's not only about touching the plant. So
You're inspiring me, and I want to just add that I think it's important that, like, to be a licensed lawyer means that there are certain types of work you can do. It's mostly about like people thinking that you're qualified to be a lawyer and also being able to like be in court. But you actually do not need to be admitted to the bar to help someone with a marijuana license. So I think actually empowering people in your community to like all you need to do to be an expert at helping with a license application is read the law, understand it if you can, and ask for help. But I mean, like, anyone can. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not. It's law school is not that. I mean, it's another one of those fake things that people are like, it's so expensive and we have to make it worth it, and we're a monopoly and like the lawyer industry. But it's like it's doable without being a lawyer. It's like algebra, kind of, but it's like I just think like if someone can read a book and teach, like, having to pay to go to law school and pay to be admitted to the bar is not necessarily like empowering community groups to have people, you know, it's about the person who's paying, right? So if you're going to pay a lawyer, you're going to expect them to have gone to law school and be admitted in the bar. But if you're going to pay someone to help you with an application who's not a lawyer but claims to be an expert in the law, that might be like a different thing, but it still wouldn't be illegal because it's not legal work. It's like what they call JD advantage work. There's like JD required group, JD being the law degree, JD required work, and JD advantage work. Like being a lobbyist, working in policy, working in community advocacy, those are JD advantage jobs. Those are not JD required jobs. So I just wanted to say that. And like, you're inspiring me. It's like, why couldn't a lawyer help educate community members who want to help people in their community around, and like a community lawyer, like what you were saying, and helping people fill out these applications. So I'm inspired.
Yeah,
Fuck
I
law
think
school.
some of the things we do at TakerootJustice too. So that's a lot of that where that comes from. That I owe that to the my mentors at this, that of like learning from their experience. And so yeah, sorry.
Well, to make hopefully one just quick point that came to mind from the really beautiful and inspiring thing that from what Pilar just shared, that I think speaks to maybe the initial question, is two things that come to mind that have been throughout this conversation and really should be priorities through this discussion, is talk of empowerment. And that's really the fundamental of what we're looking at, is power where it currently lies, where power needs to be shifted, who and what and which elements of society need to be empowered, and who and what and which elements of society need to be disempowered. And so I think something that Pilar just said that really kind of clicked on what we overall need to be doing is, yes, we need to be empowering a lot more Black and brown folks, a lot more people from disempowered and disadvantaged backgrounds to be lawyers, to be in positions that there's that empowerment to say, I can be a legislator, I can be in this position. And a lot of us that are coming from defined experiences of empowerment and of privilege, such as mine, to feel very empowered to say things like break this law, and to call it out when we see unjust laws, and to yell all the way to the top. A lot of those people have to, I think, be diverting from saying, hey, I should go to law school on a lot of the basis that Victoria is describing, and say, I need to jump right into advocacy and be demanding results and be getting as loud as my position and my privilege allows me to be, which also then creates the space and allows for support, even if I'm not actively working on that, in platforming and working to platform people and voices who traditionally haven't been, and who there's now this opening, there's at least acknowledgement that these are the people that we need to be offering restoration and repair, and also empowering and listening to. And so that's something that we all can work together to do in ways that benefit hopefully everything and everyone on a state and cannabis level.
And I just want to clarify too, and I agree with that. It's like, I'm not saying people shouldn't become lawyers if they want to be. They should feel empowered to be, and it should be accessible. And there are a lot of schools in the city you can get, like, to have scholarships and all kind, like there's ways to do it. But I've actually recently been thinking, like, in my own life, like, I just spent the last 3 years, and I came to law school because I wanted to change the law. And I've spent 3 years plus, like, being so busy with freaking law school that I have no, like, and it's like almost like a distractor. Like, people want to go into advocacy, they go to law school, they spend 3.5 years in the system that tortures them. They graduate usually with a ton of debt, and beaten out of them. So not to say people shouldn't or can't, but that they don't have to. But I also just agree with what Aaron said.
Yes, fully agree on that point. I think people should figure what is it that I want to be doing. For some people, it's like, hey, maybe you should drop out or avoid law school and go directly to this. And for others, it's, figure out the quickest path to being able to have the licensing and the accreditation and the legitimacy to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, and Victoria, yeah, don't worry. I've had a judge tell me to not go to law school. She one time, first she started telling me that because she was like, yeah, I was like, yeah, I'm considering going to law school, but I gotta first go to college. Then I was like, but that's all. So I was like, but I'm also running for office. She was like, you know what? Forget law school. Law school sucks. Just do that. Do that. That's what you should be doing. Anything in the community, do that. Don't waste your time in law school. That's what she told me. So, but I hear you. I definitely agree. Like, I don't want to discourage anyone. That's why I said if there's there are people, and there's plenty of people too. Like I said, people in prison right now that they can be amazing lawyers, and we should get them out and make them lawyers and provide them and set them up in the same way that those big private lawyers are. It's my thoughts.
I believe they would be experts through, just experience, um, and that's, it's more than a lot of people have just coming out of school. You lack the experience. You have all the books and the learning, but the experience is completely different. I want to ask Soul if Soul has anything to add or any questions or anything else that we didn't touch on that you're curious about, Soul.
That's actually my dad. I'm not sure if he's at the screen, but I would love if you got any questions.
I love that your dad is here. That's amazing. That's amazing. I guess I would open it up to Ethan again if there's anything else, if you thought of any more questions that you'd like to cover.
Like I was reading about like the home grow was gonna be 3 in veg, 3 in flower, and then up to 12 max. I was hearing, yeah, I don't know. It's like I also had the question that somebody else had raised before about the wording in the law about needing a license to be an adult cannabis smoker. Like it almost seemed like the law read that way, literally. And I'm not a lawyer either. Just how
What do you? Sorry, can you repeat that? I just didn't quite hear.
Like it was like I was trying to find the section in it, but it was saying that you need a license as a medical cannabis user, you need a license or the card. It was almost written that as an adult smoker you would need a card.
Yeah, no. So adults can possess and consume on private property. I guess the key distinction I would say between a medical and an adult user will be access to home grow sooner. There will be different types of products. An adult consumer will have to pay taxes, while a medical consumer will not pay the right taxes on it. But there are certain protections. There's a whole section on like protections for medical users. So like protections in like a lease, protections, like it says like you can't be discriminated. They can't like not give you a lease. Although how you're gonna this is like it says it sounds nice, but in theory like they can't discriminate against you on a lease if you're a medical user. But that doesn't mean they have to allow smoking. They're not supposed to be able to discriminate against you in employment if you're a medical user. Aaron, did you have something to add to that? Sorry.
No, I have another question actually that's relevant. You said, and this kind of came up before, but you said if you're a medical user, you're not going to have the taxation system. I assume that's 9% plus 4% tax. What about the THC tax? Is there a potential loophole? Yeah.
Well, the THC tax right now is on the processor to the retailer. So that's it. And this is the thing that's so annoying. Like my actual, not actual, but what'd you say?
That's such a terrible kind, because then there's nothing we can really advocate for. That's just getting passed right along to the
right. Exactly. So people are saying like, oh, this is like, because like an area that I focus on is tax. I'll be doing like another year of school focusing specifically on cannabis tax next year. And everyone's like, oh, these are low taxes. It's so low. It's 13%. First of all, not sure if the localities can't pass more taxes. That's not in there. I think certain localities will want to on certain types of businesses. The other thing is that when you include the THC content tax which goes, like I was just saying, from processor to retailer, the effective tax rate on the consumer is still going to be like in the 20s or low 30s. So, but it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, look, we're so progressive, we have low taxes, but we're just like hiding it. And as from like a tax perspective, I'm really interested in what the THC content tax is. Will that mean that it will incentivize certain behavior in terms of growth? Like what kind of strains will grow, what kind of strains will not grow. I also meant to say this earlier, which I think is relevant and related to the THC content point, which is that the rules around, like, there are strict laws. If you are a licensee and you sell anything into the illicit market, what's called the illicit market, you get that's criminalized, like felonies or misdemeanors, which in California, most of the licensed people also are selling in the illicit market because it's so overly burdensome in terms of regulations and because of the taxes that they have to pay that, you know, they're diverting a lot of it. But the other thing is if you are selling and you are not a licensee, actually fees that are based partially on milligram and THC content. So like they're kind of like building that in. They're like, we're probably going to limit THC content in the regulated market, and we're going to find people based on THC content in the illicit market. So when you limit THC content or you tax the THC content, you're discouraging high THC products, which they might also cap anyways because they have the discretion to do that. And then we're going to penalize people more heavily for those products. Yeah, makes sense if your goal is to make money and criminalize people. Sorry, I got on a rant. That makes me angry, though. It makes me really angry.
Yeah, I agreed on the taxation. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about the decrimination model is that it rightly recognizes undue taxes and regulations as criminalization for the poor and permission slips for anybody that can afford it or get around it. So I think that's also really important. And I mean, when I saw the 9% and 4%, it was like, wow, that's great. That absolutely cannot be the end of the taxes that they're putting on this. And you're really indicating the nefariousness of that. And I want to jump back because I was just texting with him, but asking my dad if he has any, I don't know if you're on, but if you have, you mentioned possibly having a question.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Well, I'm only on because I can keep track of you this way. No, actually.
Still hanging out with my druggy friends.
Pardon?
Still hanging out with my druggy friends. That's where you can find me.
Okay.
But sorry, go ahead.
We love drugs.
Nothing changes. Okay. Anyway, I guess I unfortunately wasn't on for the whole thing. I had to take off for a bit, so I didn't hear the whole presentation. But what strikes me is that just listening to you guys, here we have this law, and everybody seems to be confused as to what's in it and how it works. And I think I heard somebody mention before that there is funding within the law for different aspects of, I don't know if it's publicizing or not, having been once in public relations and such. It seems to me there's a crying need for I guess a very to the people kind of very accessible information, bullet point kinds of stuff that people can know what's there without getting into all of the details of the law, but saying, hey, you can do this, you can't do that, this is what you do, this you can't do. And the other point that occurred to me is that, Aaron told me about the seminar, but I don't know how this was publicized, but in terms of disseminating information, there's got to be an effort to get it out there, okay, in terms of being able to publicize it and get more dialogue as we're having now, but there's only within a select group of people are hip deep into it already. You're talking about reaching out to people who know nothing about this, who've heard about it, who've read the headlines or whatever. And, there are obviously many aspects of people from producers and growers to actually just users or consumers. I don't know if, I'm sure there's something in the works in terms of putting something together, public relations wise, about disseminating information, which would be accessible to different people in different areas and different levels. That's about my thought on it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in for briefly because it's number one, a great question, and some of this was discussed, and I'd really love to turn it over to everybody else because I've been ranting at my dad about cannabis for a long time at this point. But that it was mentioned, Pilar is working on educational programs for kids, and I would love to, if a mention of that. Pammy mentioned her experience in in PR and in outreach, and how that needs to be applied to exactly that, to really simple messaging that does that education. But I want to turn it over to everybody else to respond.
The only thing I wanted to say, and this is coming from a place of like complete like disdain for the state, but they actually have done like a decent job with the Office of Cannabis Management site in doing what you're saying. Although I think that obviously they're doing it in a way that's favorable to them, and it can be confusing. But it's cannabis.ny.gov, and they actually do list like what is legal and what's not legal and what the timeline looks like. But that's coming from a place of like, I wish I couldn't give them any credit, but I have to give them the tiniest amount of credit. But I also think that it's important. Yeah, right. It actually is way better. Ethan said he's looking at it now and he's blown away. It actually is way better than you would expect it to be, considering like the politics, as Pilar said, which I freaking am with. But the other thing I would say though is really important and frustrating, and I think maybe this is just like one example of this, and we didn't talk about this tonight, and I've heard mixed things about this, and I just don't trust it. But this auto expungement thing is not auto for everyone. And it's like auto sealing for some people, and you're gonna need to petition for expungement. And there's gonna need to be education around whether you want expungement or not, depending on your situation, and whether it would be like better or worse for you to like be able to prove that you had this charge that was sealed versus like it showing up. Cause like expungement doesn't, you don't trust it just because a record is expunged, meaning that it's gotten rid of, doesn't necessarily mean it won't come up. And so like in a background search, because people don't have their shit together, there's not a lot of coordination among agencies. And anyways, that's just one example where when you read the news, they're going to be like, auto expungement, it happened. And there's all these New Yorkers who are like, I don't have to do anything, my record is expunged. And I'm like, no, like this is not how it's going to be. I love that Pilar and Eric, like, and there's going to need to be education around that. So I would say like the website's great, there is some information, but with a disclaimer that not all that information, it's the information the government wants you to think is true.
It's the facade they have to put up. They have to do their check. Oh, we let you guys know, and this is, the reason they have also that information already is because that's because the bill and us like, hey, this is it. This is what all it is. So that's where they get that. But to the point about the expungement, it's not just that. I was the former coordinator for New York City for National Expungement Week. And knowing about how automatic expungement happened under the Decrim bill for a couple of years ago, it was supposed to all happen last year, and then COVID happened, so we don't know what happened. I'm still not clear what happened, but I've heard records that get expungement, like you said, what's really expunged, especially in this digital world, like really. And then there's some people who they can't have it expunged, especially folks who are undocumented, because this may, also there's a lot of miseducation out there, and that's why it's one of my passions to really provide the community with the real facts and real education, the realness. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you either. Like, some people may not agree with some things I say, but it is what it is, how I feel, my experience, and what I know. And so, remember, the expert, but it's not, like you said, like even the Clean Slate campaign, that's something a lot of people in the community don't even know is happening, what that looks like. And I had to learn this last year, if you wanted to get get a copy of your criminal record, you have to get your fingerprints. And I think prior to some legislation that I'm not sure if it went through, so don't hold me to this, but you would go to, have to pay all this money to get your fingerprints. Defenders fought against that, and then now they started like making it where you go to this one designated place, but it's still, you have to go online, so you have to have internet, you have to find a location, you have to schedule an appointment. It's gonna and it's not in your neighborhood, so now you have to travel. And so now, what if you don't have money to travel? So it's a lot of barriers. And so automatic, again, that's why the education, because so much people in my community, so many people in this city are just not educated on so many different levels. You got the legislators still with their myths on the gateway drug, of marijuana. Then you have, you know, all these other things. So it's a lot of time, patience we're gonna have to have. But then it's hard because at the same time, then we have to be fighting, you know, especially during this regulatory time, you know, to see what fuckeries to come.
The thing that is most infuriating, sorry, Aaron, I just saw you unmuted
I
too.
was just gonna say my dad just texted that he had to jump off, but he really appreciates, and he's gonna check the video footage as well. He's in Long Island with his wife and my stepsister and her 10 or 11 kids. So
Wow.
he had said to say goodbye and thank you to everyone.
Yeah, it's nice that he could come. I was gonna say the thing that makes me most infuriated about the auto expungement thing, and then I can finish this thought, but it's not like other states haven't actually done it where it is automatic, right? So like there are other states like Illinois or California or even Washington passed bills which said there is a duty on the certain state department to go through everything. We're going to allocate resources. There's a deadline. I've heard from other people like, well, it's in this bill, and I'm like, well, tell me where it is because I don't see it. Like if it's not like explicit, then it's not going to happen. So this idea that New York's like, well, we are doing it, and it says it. Look, it says you're automatically eligible to be expunged. That's auto expungement. Like, no, it's not. And like other states have actually done it, where like, it really is like a duty to on a, you know, there's a date, there's a deadline. They have to go through these records. Maybe I have more faith, but I just like
it's a process, and these agencies don't know how to do shit. Let me just be real. They don't. A lot of them. I have to deal in Takeroot. I do a lot of work, but my main work is the tenant work at Takeroot outside of the many hats I wear. But I have to work with HPD, DOB, judges and agencies, HRA, all the agencies, all the acronyms. And it's like, it in my experience, it's just actually just made it more, created an additional trauma, honestly. So, yeah.
All right. We are over 2 hours here. You guys have given me so much information. It's been amazing. And I'm sure this will be useful for everyone, you know, seeking information about, you know, licensing, about just, you know, marijuana in general and in New York. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I can't thank you all enough. But we're going to end it here. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be accessing you guys at some point with more questions. I'm sure something will pop up later. um, so get used to me bothering you. But thank you
Same
again.
here. Because we're
Yeah.
gonna have like all the educational forums, and I mean we're having one the week of 420, but it's not good. That's not enough. That's only 1 week. Like that doesn't even touch the whole city. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pammy, for like putting this together and for having me, and like Pilar and Aaron and Ethan as well. But just like this has been such a joy. If I could be helpful to you, like please reach out and I will feel the same. And I'm just so grateful that you brought us together. Pammy.
Thank you again. Like I reached out and I was like, no one's gonna answer me, and you guys all answered, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's really great. It's really great having you all together. And I'll use Pilar's words and saying all of us on each end of the spectrum, we're using the Care Bear stare. Just yeah. So I'm sorry, what were you gonna say, Pilar?
No, just like that's
awesome. Well, thank you again. Thank you everyone that joined. It's been a pleasure. And I'll be probably putting up those websites soon, just so everyone has access to those and knows where they can, you know, find like the legislation and everything and whatever information that people need. So thank you again, and you guys have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, really appreciate everything about this, and have a great night.
All right, bye.